Your glucose levels are dangerously high, Mother. Dr. Ashford called me personally. My son Lukic stood in my kitchen doorway, his face arranged in that expression of concern he'd perfected over the past 18 months. I set down my coffee mug slowly, carefully. The ceramic felt heavier than it should have. I feel perfectly fine, I said. He stepped closer. That's what diabetics don't understand. You feel fine until you don't. The morning light filtered through my kitchen window, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny accusations. I'd been seeing Dr. Ashford for 7 years. Never once had she mentioned diabetes. Never once had I experienced the symptoms Lukic was describing with such practiced certainty. Yet here he stood, my only son, holding his phone with a screenshot of lab results that bore my name. I was 58 years old. I'd raised Lukic alone after his father left when he was 3. I'd worked as a dental hygienist for 34 years, maintained my weight, exercised regularly, ate well. My medical history was clean. My family history was clean. There was no reason for this diagnosis to suddenly appear in my life like an unwelcome guest who'd somehow obtained a key to my front door. But Lukic had always been persuasive. That was his gift and his weapon, though I didn't understand that distinction yet. Dr. Ashford wants you on metformin immediately, he said, setting his phone on my counter. I already picked up the prescription. She's concerned about your A1C levels. They're at 9.2. I stared at the small white bottle he'd produced from his jacket pocket. My name was printed on the label in precise clinical letters. The dosage was 500 milligrams twice daily. I'd never taken a regular medication in my life. The few times I'd needed antibiotics or pain relief, I'd taken them reluctantly, aware of my body's sensitivity to chemicals. I want to talk to Dr. Ashford myself, I said. Lukic's expression shifted. Not dramatically. Just a small tightening around his eyes. Of course, but she's very busy. She asked me to make sure you started treatment right away. The damage from untreated diabetes can be permanent. That word, damage, lodged itself in my chest like a stone. Lukic had moved back into my house 6 months earlier. His marriage to Verena had ended, he'd explained, and he needed a fresh start. He was between jobs, looking for opportunities in the tech sector. I had the space, I had the resources. He was my son. The answer had been automatic and unquestioned. Within weeks, he'd made himself indispensable. He managed my appointments, organized my finances, handled my insurance claims. He was helpful in a way that felt like love, but tasted, in retrospect, like something else entirely. I didn't take the metformin that day. Instead, I called Dr. Ashford's office and requested an appointment. The receptionist, a woman named C who'd been there for years, told me Dr. Ashford was booked for 3 weeks. I asked if there was anything urgent. CA hesitated, then said she'd leave a note. Dr. Ashford called me back personally that evening. I was in my bedroom when my phone rang, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice immediately. Hey Etta, I'm glad Lukic got you that prescription. Your recent labs are concerning. I don't have diabetes, I said. The certainty in my voice surprised me. Your A1C is elevated. Your fasting glucose was 128. Those are pre-diabetic readings at minimum. I've never had any symptoms. I feel completely healthy. There was a pause. I could hear her typing in the background. Have you been experiencing any unusual thirst? Frequent urination? Fatigue? No, nothing. Another pause, longer this time. Hieta, I reviewed your chart. Your readings from 6 months ago were completely normal. I'm seeing a significant change in a very short period of time. That's what concerns me. I'd like you to come in for a follow-up test. We can repeat the labs to confirm. Relief flooded through me. When? I have an opening next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Can you make that? I marked it on my calendar. Lukic was at a coffee shop when I did this, working on his laptop as he did most afternoons, supposedly networking with potential employers. I didn't mention the appointment to him. I wasn't sure why I kept it private. Instinct, perhaps? The animal sensed that something wasn't quite right. Tuesday arrived with rain. I drove to Dr. Ashford's office myself, parking in the familiar lot where I'd been coming for routine checkups for 7 years. The clinic was quiet. A few people in the waiting room, their faces buried in phones or magazines. Sia greeted me warmly and directed me back to the lab. The phlebotomist, a young man with kind eyes, took my blood without comment. I'd done this so many times that my veins cooperated immediately, offering themselves up for the needle with the practiced ease of old friends. I asked him if he noticed anything unusual about my blood, and he smiled professionally and said all blood looked the same to him. We were just counting the cells. Dr. Ashford saw me 15 minutes later. She looked tired. There were new lines around her eyes that I didn't remember from my last visit. She sat across from me with my chart open on her lap, and I watched her face as she reviewed whatever was written there. "I want to ask you something," she said finally, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Has anyone else had access to your medical records, your insurance information, anything like that?" The question hung in the air between us like a bird suspended mid-flight. I thought of Lukic, organizing my files, handling my mail, sitting at my computer while I showered. "My son has helped me with some administrative things." "Why?" Dr. Ashford closed the chart. She folded her hands on top of it. "Your previous labs from 6 months ago were normal, completely normal. I pulled them myself. Your glucose was 94. Your A1C was 5.1. Both excellent readings. Then what about the results Lukic showed me? That's what I want to understand. Those results came through our system, but I didn't order them. And they weren't ordered by anyone in my practice. Someone accessed your patient portal and requested lab work without authorization. Then they picked up the results before you did." The room tilted. I reached for the armrest of the chair and held on. How is that possible? If someone had your patient portal login information, they could request tests and pick up results. It happens more often than people realize, usually with elderly patients or people with cognitive decline, but it can happen to anyone if they're not careful with their credentials. I thought about my computer, the password I'd written on a sticky note and left on my desk. Lukic had seen it. Of course he'd seen it. He'd been helping me with my email, showing me how to use the new interface. "What about the prescription?" My voice sounded very far away. "The prescription was written by me, but I didn't write it. Someone used my electronic signature. Someone with access to my account." The words didn't make sense individually, but together they formed a picture so clear and so terrible that I couldn't look away from it. Dr. Ashford leaned forward. "Hedda, I need to ask you this directly. Is your son trying to make you sick? Or is he trying to make you think you're sick?" I couldn't answer. I sat in that chair in her office while rain pounded against the window, and I couldn't find words large enough to contain what I was beginning to understand. "I'm going to call the police," Dr. Ashford said, "and I'm going to recommend that you change all your passwords immediately. Can you do that today?" I nodded. I think I nodded. I'm not entirely certain what I did in that moment because the world had become something I no longer recognized. The drive home was a study in controlled panic. My hands stayed on the wheel. My eyes stayed on the road. But inside my chest, my heart was moving too fast, too hard, like something trapped and desperate to escape. Why would Lukic do this? What possible reason could he have for convincing me I was sick when I wasn't? The answer arrived before I reached my driveway, and it was worse than any question. Money. It was always money. I'd been managing my finances independently for 34 years. I had a comfortable retirement account, a paid-off house, no debt. Nothing extravagant, but security, stability. Everything I'd worked for was there in my bank accounts and investment portfolios, waiting for the day when I wouldn't be able to work anymore. Lukic had been asking me about my will, casually at first, then with increasing frequency. He'd suggested I might want to update it now, while I was healthy and could make clear decisions. He'd offered to help me organize my financial documents. He'd asked about my life insurance policy, and I'd thought he cared about me. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Lukic's car was in the garage. He was home. I could see him through the kitchen window, making lunch, moving through my space with the comfort of someone who believed he belonged there. I went inside. He looked up from the sandwich he was assembling, his face arranging itself into that familiar expression of concern. "How was your doctor's appointment? Did she confirm the diabetes?" "No," I said. "She confirmed something else instead." I watched his face change. Just slightly. Just enough. The concern shifted into something sharper, more calculating. He set down the knife he'd been holding. "What did she say?" "She said someone accessed her patient portal without authorization. Someone ordered fake lab tests. Someone used her electronic signature to write a prescription for medication I don't need." Lukic was very still. "That's serious. You should call the police." "I know it's serious, Lukic. I know because I'm looking at the person who did it." He didn't deny it. That was what struck me most. He didn't deny it or make excuses or try to convince me I was wrong. He simply looked at me with an expression that was almost sad, as if I'd disappointed him by figuring it out. "You would have given me the money anyway," he said finally. "If you'd just asked, I would have said no." "So you decided to make me think I was sick instead?" "I decided to secure my future. You were going to leave everything to charity. I heard you tell your friend Samio on the phone. All those years I lived in your house, and you were planning to leave your money to strangers." The betrayal was so complete, so total, that I couldn't quite process it. This was my son. The boy I'd raised alone, the child I'd sacrificed for. And he was telling me he'd poisoned my life because I hadn't promised him my money. "Get out," I said. "Mother, get out of my house, right now." He left. Not immediately. First, he went to his room and packed a bag. I stood in the kitchen and listened to him move through the house, gathering his things. He came back down with a suitcase and a backpack, and he looked at me one more time with that expression of calculated sadness. "You'll regret this," he said. "When you're old and alone, you'll wish you'd been kinder to me." After he left, I locked every door. I changed every password. I called my bank and my investment company and told them that no one but me could access my accounts. I called my lawyer and updated my will. I called the police and filed a report. The detective who took my statement was a woman named Lynaley Dixon. She listened to my story without interrupting, and when I finished, she told me this wasn't the first time she'd heard something like it. There was a name for what Lukic had done. Factitious disorder imposed on another. Medical abuse? Financial exploitation? "We can press charges," Detective Dixon said. "But I need to be honest with you. The evidence is circumstantial. The fake lab tests are documented. The unauthorized prescription is documented. But proving he did it, proving he had the intent to defraud you, that's harder. His lawyer will argue he was just trying to help, that he was concerned about your health." "He admitted it," I said. "Did he admit to the specific crimes, or did he just say he wanted money?" I thought back to our conversation in the kitchen. He'd said he wanted to secure his future. He'd said I was going to leave my money to charity. He hadn't explicitly said he'd forged the lab results or stolen Dr. Ashford's signature. He admitted enough, I said. But Detective Dixon's expression told me that enough might not be sufficient. The police investigation took 3 months. They interviewed Dr. Ashford. They reviewed the electronic records. They traced the IP address that had accessed my patient portal. It came from my home network, but that didn't prove it was Lukic. It could have been anyone with access to my Wi-Fi password, which was written on that sticky note on my desk. In the end, the district attorney decided there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. The charges were dropped. Lukic had won. I learned this on a Tuesday afternoon in January. I was sitting in my living room when my phone rang. It was Detective Dixon. She sounded frustrated and angry, but her anger wasn't directed at me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." "What happens now?" "Now you protect yourself. Change your passwords regularly. Monitor your accounts. Don't let him back into your home. And if he tries to contact you, document it. Save everything. If he tries again, we'll have a pattern." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my house. The house I'd worked 34 years to own. The house my son had tried to steal from me by making me believe I was dying. But Lukic wasn't finished. Not yet. 2 weeks after the charges were dropped, I received a call from a woman named Verena. She identified herself as Lukic's ex-wife and said she needed to talk to me about something important. We met at a coffee shop near my house, and she ordered tea and looked at me with eyes that held the same betrayal I was feeling. "He did it to me too," she said. "But differently. He convinced me I had fibromyalgia. He got me on pain medications. He controlled my prescriptions, my doctor visits, everything. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd been on those medications for 2 years. I was dependent on them. I was confused all the time. I couldn't think clearly enough to leave him." "How did you get away?" I asked. "My sister came to visit. She saw what was happening and took me to a different doctor. That doctor saw through it immediately. She told me I didn't have fibromyalgia. She told me I was being medically abused. My sister helped me get clean from the medications and get away from Lukic." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I wanted to warn you. He's going to try again. He's going to try to make you think you need him. He's going to isolate you and convince you that you're sick, or weak, or incapable. And he's going to do it because that's what he does. That's who he is." I listened to Verena's story, and I felt the ground shift beneath me again. The man I'd raised wasn't a product of circumstance or desperation. He was someone who deliberately hurt people. Someone who specialized in it. Someone who had practiced on his wife and then moved on to his mother. "Did you press charges?" I asked. "I tried. But like with you, the evidence wasn't clear enough. He was too careful. He never explicitly admitted anything. He just gaslit me and manipulated me until I couldn't trust my own mind anymore." After Verena left, I sat in that coffee shop for an hour. I ordered more tea I didn't drink. I watched other people move through their normal lives, and I felt like I was watching them from behind glass. Everything had changed. My understanding of my son had changed. My understanding of myself had changed. I'd failed to protect myself from someone who should have been my greatest source of security. But I also understood something else. I was still here. I was still thinking clearly. I was still capable of protecting myself going forward. I went home and made a list of everything I needed to do. I hired a financial advisor to review my accounts and set up protections. I changed my will again, this time making very clear that Lukic would receive nothing. I set up alerts on all my accounts. I changed my passwords and wrote them down in a secure location. I told my friends what had happened, and I asked them to watch for any contact from Lukic. And then I did something harder. I called Lukic. He answered on the third ring. "Hello, Mother. I want you to know that I know what you did," I said. "And I want you to know that I've documented everything. If you try to contact me again, if you try to access my accounts, if you try to see me or contact my friends, I will file a restraining order." "You're being unreasonable," he said. "I made a mistake. I was desperate. I needed help, and you wouldn't give it to me. You didn't ask for help. You tried to poison my life." "I didn't poison anything. I hung up. I didn't need to hear his justifications or his excuses. I didn't need to listen to him reframe what he'd done as something less terrible than it was. I'd heard enough. I'd heard more than enough. The weeks after that call were strange. I moved through my days with a sense of unreality, as if I was watching someone else live my life. I went to work. I saw patients. I came home to my empty house. I slept without dreaming, or if I dreamed, I didn't remember it. In February, I received a letter from Lukic. It was handwritten, several pages long. He wrote about his childhood, about feeling neglected, about believing that I'd always favored my career over him. He wrote about his marriage to Verena and how she'd betrayed him. He wrote about being desperate and scared and not knowing what else to do. He didn't apologize, not once. He explained and justified and contextualized, but he never said the words, "I'm sorry," or "I was wrong." I put the letter in a drawer. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it away. I kept it as evidence of who my son was and what he was capable of. 6 months passed. Then a year. Lukic didn't contact me again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to another state. He'd gotten a job in tech, something he'd been talking about when he lived with me. He'd started dating someone new. He was building a new life, and I was grateful to be excluded from it. But the damage he'd done to me didn't disappear with time. It transformed into something else. It became a kind of hypervigilance. I questioned every piece of medical advice I received. I second-guessed every diagnosis. I became suspicious of people who offered help, wondering what they wanted in return. It took me 2 years to understand that I was letting him continue to hurt me, just in a different way. Every time I questioned my doctor's advice or refused help from a friend, I was giving him power over my life. He wasn't here anymore, but his influence remained, like a stain that wouldn't wash out. So I decided to do something different. I decided to take back my life. I found a therapist named Samio who specialized in trauma and family betrayal. I started seeing her every week. I talked about my childhood with my own parents, about the ways I'd learned to be self-sufficient to the point of isolation. I talked about why I'd been so willing to believe Lukic's lies. I talked about the ways his betrayal had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself. In therapy, I learned that I wasn't responsible for Lukic's choices. I couldn't have prevented his actions by being a better mother or a more generous person. He'd made deliberate decisions to hurt me, and those decisions were his alone. But I was responsible for how I moved forward. I was responsible for reclaiming my life from the person who'd tried to steal it. I started small. I called my doctor and asked her to explain my lab results to me in detail. I asked her to help me understand what was normal and what was concerning. I asked her questions instead of accepting her answers without thought. Dr. Ashford was patient with me, and over time, I began to trust her again. I started having dinner with friends. I let them help me when I needed help. I accepted that asking for assistance wasn't weakness, It was connection. I took a vacation by myself. I went to the coast and sat on the beach and watched the waves, and I felt something shift inside me. The weight that had been sitting on my chest since Lukic left began to lift. 2 years after he moved away, I received a call from Detective Dixon. She'd been investigating another case and had discovered that Lukic had done the same thing to someone else. A woman in his new state had reported medical abuse, and the evidence was clearer this time. There were witnesses. There were documented patterns. There was enough for charges. "I wanted you to know," Detective Dixon said, "in case you wanted to file a victim impact statement." I did want to file a statement. I wanted to tell the judge what Lukic had done to me. I wanted to explain how he'd stolen my sense of security and my trust in my own judgment. I wanted to make sure that what happened to me didn't happen to anyone else. But I also knew that my statement wouldn't change what had already happened. It wouldn't undo the year I'd spent questioning my health. It wouldn't restore the time I'd spent in therapy processing his betrayal. It wouldn't give me back the son I'd thought I had. What it could do was ensure that he faced consequences. What it could do was protect future victims. So I wrote my statement. I detailed everything that had happened. I explained the psychological impact of his actions. I submitted it to the court. Lukic was convicted. He received 3 years in prison and 5 years of probation. When I heard the verdict, I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. I felt something more complicated. Relief, yes, but also sadness. Sadness that my son had become someone capable of this. Sadness that our relationship had ended in a courtroom instead of at a dinner table. Today, I'm 59 years old. I've been working with my therapist for 3 years. I've rebuilt my relationships with my friends. I've learned to trust my instincts again, and more importantly, I've learned to trust my doctors and the people in my life who care about me. I don't hear from Lukic anymore. He's still in prison, and his release date is 2 years away. I don't know what will happen when he gets out. I don't know if he'll try to contact me or if he'll try to rebuild his life separately. I've made arrangements with my lawyer to ensure that if he does try to contact me, I have legal recourse. But I've also learned that I can't spend my life waiting for the other shoe to drop. I can't let his potential actions control my present. I can only live the life I have right now with the people who've proven they care about me and the doctors I've learned to trust. The prescription bottle of metformin still sits in my medicine cabinet. I've never opened it. I keep it as a reminder of what happened, of how close I came to believing a lie about myself. Sometimes I look at it and I remember the morning Lukic stood in my kitchen doorway with his practiced expression of concern. I remember how easily I almost believed him, but I also remember Dr. Ashford's question. Is your son trying to make you sick, or is he trying to make you think you're sick? The answer I learned was both, and understanding that difference saved my life. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you have someone in your life who's convincing you that you're sick when you're not, or if you're helping someone do that to another person, I want you to know that there is help available. Talk to a doctor you trust. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Reach out to a therapist. You don't have to live with this alone.